My name's Gordon Michie. I'm currently head of fundraising and learning at Poppyscotland, and you'll probably know us from the annual iconic Scottish Poppy Appeal every November. But we do more than just the Scottish Poppy Appeal. We do all sorts of fundraising, from direct marketing to legacies to events, and I've got a fantastic team of 26 staff. But the real heart and soul of Poppyscotland are our army of nearly 10,000 volunteers. And it's working with them that really gave me the inspiration to try and give back as well, because I'm always asking for people for their time, their money, their talent to help our cause, to help our beneficiaries. And I served in the Royal Air Force when I was young, and I've always had a passion for military charities. And over the years, I've tried to give back in my spare time to help those in need within the armed forces community. My first non-exec role, trustee role, was for Veterans House in Scotland, and they provide housing across Scotland for disabled veterans. It's a home for life in essence, and we have nearly 700 properties the length and breadth of the country. And when I first went to Poppyscotland, we have a fantastic team of poppy makers and wreath makers, and I found out that many of them were our residents at Veterans House in Scotland, and being able to hear the stories about how it's changed their life, because when you come out of the military, you don't have accommodation, and you've been provided with that accommodation. And to ensure that a disabled veteran's got a safe, secure home is really, really important. And I've been with Veterans House in Scotland for about 4 years now, and I'm currently the chair of their finance committee. I had some other voluntary stuff in my life that was non-exec, and that came to an end. And I saw Aspen people advertising for a role for a director for Sight Scotland Veterans. They're a really interesting charity, and I'd been watching them and watching their development through their merger, bringing the two charities into one, their rebrand to Sight Scotland Veterans. And I thought that's a really interesting thing that they've done. And because I knew that they didn't fundraise for the Scottish War Blinded as it was, because they had quite a healthy set of reserves. And I'd always heard about the London Centre out in West Lothian, and the work that they did with the visually impaired. And I felt maybe that's an organisation I can get involved in. And when I did some research about the Board of Trustees, I realised they didn't have a veteran on their Board of Trustees at the time, or their last serving veteran on the board had retired or come to the end of their period of governance. And I didn't really know a huge amount about visual impairment. And I was very honest about that. But I said that my passion was for the veterans and giving back and becoming a voice and a representative at the board level for our veteran beneficiaries within Sight Scotland Veterans. And I think I must have convinced them, because they asked me to join the board. Probably the best trustee induction programme that I've seen any place. We've been out to visit the site at Limburn. We're going to see the Scottish Braille Press. We're being invited in to see the various departments that make the organisation tick. And I've done one board meeting so far. And I think being a trustee of Sight Scotland Veterans and Veterans House in Scotland, it introduces you to a wider network, people you would not normally meet. Because in my day job, it's all about the veterans, it's the armed forces community. But coming into the visual impaired world, there's people from the NHS, there's people from other charities, other businesses that are there for their own personal reason. And I think that's one of the great benefits of being a trustee non-exec. It widens that network of contacts that you can have, because you never know what lies ahead for you in the future, and or what's going to happen at work, or what opportunity in the day job comes along that you can maybe get one of them involved in. I think there's different pressures on you from being a trustee to being a member of a senior management team. And I think you have to learn differently, and you have to think differently. And ultimately, you bring that back full circle to what you're doing Monday to Friday. That makes you a better manager, it makes you a better leader, it makes you a better director. And you can gather these skills and hone them by volunteering. That takes me back to the Poppy Appeal, seeing those 10,000 people that freely give up their time from all walks of life to volunteer. And if I'm expecting people to volunteer, I feel that I have to volunteer and give my time back as well. The experience of being on a board and how that impacts on my day job, it allows me to think with a greater sense of clarity about the decisions I take as a manager and the impact that has on my team and the wider organisation team. It helps ensure that on a day-to-day basis, we're always looking to break down silos. Because as a trustee, you've got the overall good of the organisation that you're looking at, but maybe as a head of department, your prime focus is looking after your people, is looking after your budget lines, and allowing others at your level, your peers, to look after their people and their budget lines. But as a trustee, you're having to look after the organisational budget lines and see where that overall impact is. And I think the skills sitting around the board table when I'm maybe doing the quarter one reforecast and how that impacts on anybody else, if I've overspent or underspent, what impact does that have on my colleagues in the next department? That, I think, is a really important skill that you gain from being a trustee. It's that big picture, it's that umbrella view of what the organisation is trying to deliver. My first trustee role was for my professional body, and I think the thing that surprised me was the level of responsibility that you take on, and ultimately you're responsible for a whole sector's governance, and that was a really valuable lesson to learn early on when I was then able to move into trusteeships of the two charities that I'm involved in now that I've got a real passion for, because being a trustee of the Institute was more about work. It was more about ensuring that the sector was recognised as a professional body. But being a trustee of these two charities, the focus always has to be on the beneficiary and how we benefit them as an organisation. And I think what really struck me, the lesson was that I must always detach what my view is and put myself in the shoes of that beneficiary and how the decision I make impacts on their daily life. And I think when you sit back and you take a minute and you think about that and you ponder it, you think, I'm responsible for people's lives, ultimately. And again, there was a little bit of that when you were a director of business, because if you couldn't pay the staff at the end of the month, they couldn't pay their mortgage. So there was a wee bit of responsibility for that. But people choose to work someplace, and if there was any threat of the business going under, people could move on to something else. But when you're working with a beneficiary that maybe doesn't have any other option, that they can't move on to something better, they need our support. I think when that realization dawns on you, you see the importance of the work that you're actually doing. And that was a big wake-up call, maybe coming from that corporate world, saying, well, it's about making sure we can pay all our bills at the end of the month and have a little bit of profit, and then get on to the next month, find the next client. But when I look at our beneficiaries and the homes that we provide, and I look at the services we provide at Limburn and the Scottish Braille Press and our visually impaired beneficiaries, and particularly with those with visual impairment, because I could not imagine walking in their shoes every day, and that's what gives me a sense of sort of maybe calmness, that I'm helping them lead their best lives. And I think if we're able to ensure people can lead their best lives, we've done the best job that we can do. I think it's really important that people want to give back to society. Anything that you can do that makes a positive change will impact on your family, your wider community, your wider circle of friends. And even if you only think that's a small thing, it's not when all those millions of small actions occur together and they become a power for good. Everybody's got it in them to volunteer. Organisations are maybe looking for an hour a week or 5 hours a week or 2 days a week, and you can find some place that meets your values that you can give some time back from, instead of maybe just sitting watching that 7:30 show on STV every week. I think anybody can find some time to give back, and the sense of reward that you do get, you've done your difference for the local community. I did a couple of in my local town, sort of committee member roles, and I ended up being chair for a year of the local youth uniformed organisations, all because none of the parents would do it because they felt they were busy looking after the kids. And people came to me because of my experiences. I've always lived in the town that I live in, so I'm relatively well known there. It's a wee small town up in Fife, where everybody knows everybody else sort of thing. And I said, well, I can give you a year. I'm only giving you a year until you find a parent that's prepared to step forward. And I think you will always find somebody in your local area with those skill sets. And if you give them a defined task to do, maybe that's you'll get that job done. I think with my first trustee role within the military community that I've got a passion for, I think what I would do differently is that I would try and find more time to do my due diligence on the background of the organisation, speak to others before I got heavily involved, and particularly where I work, I probably would have spoken to more of the beneficiaries to understand what their challenges were and what the successes that the organisation had achieved over 100 years. And I think bringing a little bit of background knowledge into a trustee role is so invaluable, because when you're sitting around that board table for the first time, and I'm a firm advocate of, if you are appointed to a board or a committee, you shouldn't be a passenger. You shouldn't be sitting there silent. You're there to input. You're there to put your thought process across and comment, because if you're not doing that, there's no point in you being there. But to do that and have valid points of view, you really need to understand the organisation. And I think that if there was an apprenticeship for trustees before they move on to the full board, I think that would be something really good for organisations to do. And I know there is one organisation within the military community, they have their general counsel, and that was always seen as a breeding ground or a test bed for full membership of the Board of Trustees, because they were able to be involved in it. They were able to maybe go out and speak at Rotary clubs about the work, or go to a check presentation because the fundraising staff were busy doing something else. And I think that's what I would probably have liked, a little bit more opportunity to engage with the charity before becoming one of the responsible trustees and directors of it. Find an organisation that you feel passionate about, because your passion will help drive that mission. But fully understand what you're getting into, because it's not just 5 committee meetings a year where you nod your head. You have to commit time and energy. And if you're like me, you need an organisation that supports you in that volunteering realm, because they need to understand that you will become a better member of staff by learning from other organisations, by giving your time up. They all do look very similar. It's that early retiree. I think the more diverse individuals we can get around the table and hear their voices, be that from different ethnic backgrounds, be that from people with service users of the organisation, so they're giving us first-hand testimony of what it's like, and the younger person, because I think for that younger person coming in and being able to understand the challenges that the management, the directors, the board of trustees have that impacts on them is really, really useful. And the most successful boards that I've seen and that I'm involved in are the boards that welcome their senior management to attend the board meeting, so they can see, they can hear, there's a level of transparency within the management of it. And if there's areas that the board feel that need to be kept confidential, you can always ask them to retire and have an agenda item for them that is board members only. But I think a good board, a strong board, has nothing to hide from its senior members of staff, and they should give them the opportunity to help drive that organisation, albeit they don't have the fiduciary responsibility of it. They're the ones at the coalface delivering day to day for the organisation. So I think that would be my plea to anyone listening to this as a chair of a board. Make sure your senior staff are part of that, because that will make your organisation much more successful.